January from their Professional Series. The program is Tibet You Weren't Paying Attention. Monica, the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you again for having me, and extra special shout out to Bob Katz for being an amazing publisher and giving me permission to do a presentation on a paper that has yet to be published by BSI Press. So thank you, Bob. All right, so let's break out the fun. Tibet, you were not paying attention. Mindfulness and Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I traveled for 2 years in Tibet, therefore, and amused myself. Oh, sorry. And my apologies. Hold on one second. My apologies. Hang tight, guys. Okay. My apologies. We are good. All right. We're going to try that again. All right, slight technical issues, but we're making it happen. And we're going to minimize that. Actually, hold on. Try that again. Share screen. There we go. Attempt number 2. I traveled for 2 years in Tibet, therefore, and amused myself by visiting Lhasa and spending some days with the head Lama. You may have read of the remarkable explorations of a Norwegian explorer named Sigurdsson, but I am sure that it never occurred to you that you were receiving news of your friend. Sherlock Holmes in the Empty House from 1905. Humans are fascinated and captivated by intelligent people. Many popular films and television shows feature a protagonist who seems to have an intellectual edge over the rest of us, who can observe and perceive things that normal people cannot. Perhaps this explains why the never-ending appeal of the master detective, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and why over the last decade, several books and many articles have attempted to deconstruct the formula for how to make our brains work like his. Dr. Maria Konnikova wrote the definitive tone on the subject in her 2013 book, Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, in which she looks at how Holmes uses several psychological strategies to see, observe, and know what other people don't know. Her take on why Sherlock Holmes possesses an almost superhuman ability to observe the minutiae the rest of us miss can be distilled into the concept of mindfulness, which is a practice that allows for an increased creativity, imagination, observation, and learning. While it would be folly to attempt to cover all the concepts for why Sherlock Holmes thinks the way that he does, in such a confined space, Dr. Konnikova's book is about 260 pages long, and it's not exhaustive. Understanding mindfulness and its various components will help us put us one step closer to understanding Holmes's brain and help us think a little more like him. For many people, mindfulness is a psychobabble buzzword that they have some vague sense of understanding, but struggle to explain when asked for a definition. This is not uncommon. When people are asked to explain a heady abstract concept, like consider trying to define love or trying to define justice. It's not that easy, is it? Now, simply put, mindfulness is the practice of purposely and fully bringing one's attention to the present moment. This may sound a little like Eastern philosophical practices, and for good reason. The concept of mindfulness is derived from the concept used in Zen and Tibetan meditation techniques, sati, which is practicing awareness. Tibetan meditation techniques allow the practitioner to increase awareness of what is happening in their body and in their environment by finding ways to quiet a chaotic or busy mind, which I usually refer to in my practice as monkey mind. Or for those of you who know me, probably Monica mind, because my brain certainly goes in many places all at once. And it allows us to be able to calm our brain down and focus on the direct here and now. Now, this increased state of awareness was popularized in the Western world in the writings by the Buddhist luminary Thich Nhat Hanh, as well as by Dr. Herbert Benson, founder of the Benson Henry Institute for the Mind-Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital, and whose 1975 book, The Relaxed Response, utilized Zen meditation techniques, including mindfulness, to combat stress. Physiologically, engaging in mindfulness helps shift our thoughts to the prefrontal cortex of our brains, which helps us shift our thoughts, from the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that triggers the fight or flight response. And by shifting our thoughts up to the prefrontal cortex, that triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which restores our bodies to a state of calm. As a result of this finding, the practice of using meditative breathing techniques to increase one's awareness and calm a busy mind has been widely adopted in the field of psychology as a clinical strategy to help patients increase their productivity and awareness, as well as to cope with depression, anxiety, anger, and stress. And to be fair, guys, as a clinician, I use mindfulness meditation on a daily basis, almost on an hourly basis with my clients. So there's a lot to it. Now, although not known by that name in Holmes's era, mindfulness did exist, certainly in Zen and other similar philosophies, and could have been accessible to him. But we can safely suggest that Holmes was a practitioner of mindfulness. An exchange between him and Watson in A Scandal in Bohemia indicates that he is far more aware of his surroundings than the average person. Holmes comments that Watson sees but did not observe. So going through the exchange, for example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room. Watson replies, frequently. Holmes says, how often? Watson replies, well, some 100 times. Holmes says, then how many are there? Watson replies, how many? I don't know. Quite so, Holmes responds. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. This is one of many examples from the canon in which Holmes does the trick, being able to find the tiny details and connections between things that are ordinary humans miss. Watson remains blissfully unaware of his surroundings, mindlessly wandering through life, while Holmes surveys his environment with a wide view, which allows his brain to acknowledge and embrace the bigger picture and notice what others do not. Holmes is actively paying attention to the world around him. This principle is the very essence of mindfulness. Now, in understanding an abstract concept, it is often easier to if we have a frame of reference. So we're going to begin with a state which most of us find ourselves in daily, mindlessness. Mindlessness is an inactive state of mind that is characterized by reliance on distinctions drawn in the past. When people are mindless, they are trapped in a rigid perspective, insensitive to the ways in which meaning changes depending on subtle context, or subtle changes in context. In less technical language, mindfulness, or rather mindlessness, means that we are not fully paying attention to what is happening around us at any moment in time. That is, that busy monkey mind causes us to miss important details or to fail to properly examine what we observe with a skeptical eye. Mindlessness usually comes in one of two ways: through repetition, or when we have limited sources of information. In looking at the mindless repetition, let us examine the process of starting your car. When was the last time that you, a driver, consciously thought about and made yourself fully aware of each step involved in driving your car as you were doing them? Most likely you don't give it that much thought, and you probably haven't since you're about 14, 15, 16, whatever age you started to learn to drive. Starting your car is something that you have done repeatedly for years, and the process has become automatic. You do it without thinking about it. I mean, when you think about it, it's okay, let's turn the ignition. Okay, and put our foot on the brake, turn the ignition, check our mirrors. Okay, and shift. Now, as I'm kind of miming this process, what's really puzzling is that I haven't driven a car that requires a key in years. And the last time that I drove a car that had a shifter on the steering column was probably in the 1990s. And yet, when I consciously think about these processes, that's kind of how or where my brain goes. And so, it's a script that's in our head that we just kind of mindlessly follow along. This process explains why Dr. Watson was unable to correctly identify that there are 17 steps at Baker Street. He's done it so many times that he has just stopped paying attention to the details. Now, having access to a solitary source of information also limits us. Consider a beloved holiday tradition, meal preparation. In my family, ham is always served for our evening meal on Christmas Day. Is there anything wrong with having a turkey, duck, or maybe even a goose? No, of course not. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, eating anything other than just ham doesn't feel right. In accepting the information from a singular source, my family, as a fact, and failing to consider and be open to alternatives, like any other main dish, I end up locking myself into and perpetuating a mindless behavior that serves no purpose. Likewise, Watson has limited himself by not considering alternative explanations, like, for example, how the horse was stolen in Silver Blaze. He fails to consider the oddity of the dog doing nothing in the nighttime. Now, multitasking has become a way of life for many of us in the Western world. I'm extraordinarily guilty of it. It is the process of engaging in several activities simultaneously, on the theory that one can get more work done by handling multiple projects and multiple tasks than by focusing our full attention on a single task. Research by the American Psychological Association indicates that while there may be an increase in the quantity of work produced through multitasking, there is a significant decrease in the quality of that work. This reduction in quality can be explained by the fact that our brains are not adept at rapidly switching between our attention between multiple things, which means that we are not fully paying attention to any of the activities in which we are engaged. And thus we are decreasing our ability to perform tasks well or fully recall information. Smartphones, which, we all live with these stupid little black boxes. Smartphones further complicate things as we respond to the alerts in a very Pavlovian manner, splitting our attention and increasing our mindlessness. Basically, we get an alert, the phone dings, we respond, we look at it, we hear it. Our heart skips a beat just because it could be something important. This means that most of us go through many of our daily activities thinking that we're fully present when in fact we are not. We are passively seeing what is going on around us rather than actively observing and engaging with it. When we act mindlessly, we often default our behavior to past patterns that may no longer serve a useful purpose. For example, we may have learned a long time ago that it was necessary to warm up our engines of our car on cold days so the oil will flow properly and lubricate the engine. In newer models of cars, warming up the engine prior to driving, even on cold days, is unnecessary. The context has changed, but the behavior remains the same. Many people will still warm up their car engines for a few minutes before driving, even if they have a newer model, thus wasting time and gas in the process. We often do not think through our actions and thus repeat past patterns without conscious thought. Now, to break free from this mindless existence, we need to engage in activities that allow us to be fully present in the moment. While that sounds simple enough, doing it requires practice, time, and significant energy expenditure. Mindfulness is an active and dynamic shift from passively engaging in life to fully paying attention, practicing deliberate thinking, and changing how we observe the world. The very things that separate Sherlock Holmes from the rest of us. Engaging in active attention is a challenge in a world that is increasingly built to fragment it, especially since our minds are designed to wander. Societal expectation often requires us to multitask, to pay attention to multiple things at once, while being plugged into the telephone, email, and texts, and ready to respond to app alerts and to juggle several tasks and projects simultaneously. With all of this stimulation, our thoughts become chaotic. Yet it is possible for those who practice mindfulness to calm a busy brain. And one way to get there is through meditation. So the following is a meditation exercise that is used by clinicians and, to be fair, used by myself with people who struggle with anxiety. So think for a moment, and we're not going to go through this because this would be not a good use of our 10 minutes at this moment in time, but try this later. Sit quietly with your eyes closed. Try to focus on your breathing. I want you to notice the ins and outs of your breathing and be aware of each of those breaths and how deep or shallow those breaths are. If you find your mind wandering elsewhere, that's okay. There's no judgment. But what I want you to do is to acknowledge where your mind has wandered and then actively bring back your attention to the breathing. Now, what I want you to do is do that for 10 minutes. It's a lot more difficult than people think, right? This exercise is simple, but it's not easy. The goal of this exercise is to help people recognize that we can control our brain and to think about what we want to think about rather than our brains being in control of us. Sometimes staying focused is difficult, so using a guided meditation app like Calm, Headspace, or Insight Timer to walk one through an exercise like this can be helpful. And while it may feel like we're doing nothing for 10 minutes, we are actively working on rewiring our brains to be more productive. This puts our brains in training to be more able to focus on things better and longer than we would in our highly distracted conditions. If we do this for 10 minutes a day for several weeks, we will find a measurable increase in our ability to remember details, to stay focused on tasks, increase productivity, and be less prone to being distracted by other things. Now, to better understand the feeling of mindfulness, think about a time when you're engaged in an activity that you enjoy immensely, perhaps reading Sherlockiana. And then before you knew it, several hours have passed without your conscious awareness. And during those few hours, your brain was not multitasking. You were not thinking of the grocery list or what clothes you were going to wear the next day. You were focused on that single task that held your attention. You were fully present in the moment and fully occupied in reading that book, which leads to greater retention of information and better understanding of the content than if you were multitasking. Now imagine having that level of focus anytime that you might need it, and you will have a much better understanding of what it is to think like Sherlock Holmes. Recall that Watson observes Holmes visibly thinking while he is meditatively smoking his pipe in The Solitary Cyclist, and how Holmes notes that he has been in Devonshire in The Hound of the Baskervilles when he has not left his armchair. Now, several researchers have found evidence of practices that enhance one's mindfulness. These include, but are not limited to, curating our knowledge and minimizing external stimuli. Humans tend to remember details that seem personally relevant to us. Have you ever noticed that after buying an item, like maybe a car, you start to notice other vehicles of that make and model on the road with increasing frequency? Your mind is primed to pick up on that model since that model is now relevant to you. Likewise, all things that deal with crime and detection are relevant to Sherlock Holmes, as he trained his mind to be able to pick up on such information. So let's consider Watson's list of Holmes's limitations from A Study in Scarlet. And you guys can read, but this is just a refresher. You know, there's certain areas where Holmes has no knowledge whatsoever. But as we get through the list, he happens to have, you know, a pretty significant level of information on chemistry, you know, sensational literature, geology. Now, what's really funny is that Holmes, bless him, has specifically curated the knowledge that he has, assembling what would be relevant to his chosen, or rather created, profession, and tends to ignore the things that he deems irrelevant. A detective needs to know much about poisons, but he doesn't need to know much about basic gardening. Likewise, Holmes would need to know basic anatomy since he investigates murders, but he does not need to understand it at the same level as Watson, who is a doctor. Perhaps this explains why Dr. John Lovers on Three Continents Watson notices the moods, manners, and dress and aesthetic beauty of Holmes's female clients, while Holmes is actively looking for crime-related clues that might help him with his case. Also noteworthy in this list is Holmes's immense knowledge of sensational literature. The more that one reads, the more that one learns, and the better that one absorbs additional information, as well as noticing connections among things that may not be connected apparently at first. And this concept is called brain plasticity. In other words, the more that one learns, the better one is at learning. To understand what might have taken place in a crime, one must be familiar with other similar crimes as points of comparison. Holmes clearly spends a great deal of time reading and gathering information about crimes because he is aware that the more information that he has, the more he is open to the potential possibilities, which opens us to considering alternatives that we would not have before. This explains why Holmes was able to connect the dog doing nothing in the nighttime with the concept that the dog was familiar with the thief beforehand. Now, further, it has been long known that playing a musical instrument, such as the violin, uses the peripheral nervous system, which controls the movement of your fingers as well as gross and fine motor skills. The brain's executive function, that part of the brain that plans and makes decisions, also known as the prefrontal cortex that we just talked about before, comes into play when, as a musician plays one part, but keeps focus on what is coming next. Couple that with sensory input, visual, auditory, emotional, and all at the same time, and it becomes a total brain workout. So even if Holmes's major leisure activity is a meditative technique whose aim is to put his brain into a space where it can learn and grow, thus aiding his professional pursuits. And when listening to clients explain their cases, Holmes will occasionally close his eyes while listening to their narrative. This seemingly innocuous action reduces the intake of extraneous stimuli, thus allowing Holmes to be more fully present with the client and maximize his focus on the information the client relays, like putting blinders on a horse to keep them on the path. Additionally, Holmes is not thinking about things other than the narrative that the client is laying out before him. Instead, he formulates questions that dig deeper into what is being said, eliciting additional information from the client that might not otherwise have emerged. Holmes is literally shutting his eyes to maximize his mindfulness so he can think more powerfully, constructively, and creatively. So, Holmes was the ultimate Western practitioner of mindfulness. He was a meditator, an avid reader of things that were relevant to him in his profession, and a user of strategies that enhanced his focus and made his mindfulness more effective. While being mindful is helpful in helping us see and observe more than we ever realized possible, it is also an active pursuit that requires a great deal of energy. Many of us normal humans just simply do not have that level of energy to dedicate to obtain this degree of mindfulness. We have obligations, hobbies, many interests, and families. These are things that Watson and the rest of us could do, but many of us have chosen to be a little less single-minded in our pursuits. Holmes was single-minded. We are not. So, why did Holmes spend 2 years in Tibet? I believe this conclusively shows that Holmes went to live and study under the monks, practicing mindfulness meditation at the monasteries in Tibet. Holmes was a man who was always interested in learning more. He realized he could benefit from additional training to make his sharp senses even keener by continuing to expand his understanding of mindfulness. I mean, after all, education never ends, Watson. It is a series of lessons. The greatest, or with the greatest for the last. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Monica, thank you very much. That was excellent. For those of you that want to ask a question, Monica, in the chat section, you can just type in the letter Q. I will call on you and I will ask you to unmute. So our first question goes to Ambrose Scott. Ambrose, please unmute and ask your question.
Well,
hello? Ambrose, are you there?
sorry. Yeah, but I am not very okay. Let's say I am here. Well, have more. So this fiction because I published a short story about Sherlock Holmes in a Italian book. That the name is The Study in Itaco. And I hope that in the future I can publish other short story about Sherlock Holmes, and maybe with the Fu Manchu. Well, for the other in this period, sorry for my bad English.
Mhm. Your bandwidth is low. I'm not sure if I caught all of that, Ambrose. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I apologize as well. Randy Getz, you have a question. Unmute and ask, please.
Yes, excellent, Monica.
Thank you.
It's a great job. I am a little surprised that you didn't actually have a brain in your hand to demonstrate the various.
Oh, that's fair. Usually when I'm discussing it with my clients, my hair's in a pony, and I'm basically pointing back. Here's the amygdala.
Oh, right.
Up
right,
here is
right.
the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
And
exactly.
demonstrating that on my own head.
Great.
Yeah, I should probably
expect that.
add that to the PowerPoint.
My question though is, do you think that mindfulness is a inherent characteristic trait, or is it a learned skill?
It's definitely, it is definitely a learned skill. There are some people that are able to be more focused naturally. And I will just say, I'm going to throw myself under the bus in this case. I have ADHD. I'm not medicated. Those who know me probably know my brain just kind of goes all over the place. As Greg is nodding over there and is like, wait, Monica has a difficult time staying focused. Now, I am unmedicated ADHD. And as a result of that, my brain just kind of naturally wanders and goes all over the place. But with mindfulness meditation, I'm able to stay a little bit more focused. This is how I'm able to be an effective therapist, by the way, it's like, okay, I can focus on a thing, but it's, for a lot of minds that are monkey mind, and that you don't have to have ADHD in order to have monkey mind. Most of us just live in a world that is, ooh, I got a text alert. Ooh, I got a text alert. Ooh, I got an app alert. So we now live in a world that is significantly more fragmented than it was maybe 30 years ago, just because of how wired in we are. And so our brains over those last several decades have kind of been retrained to respond to that and to be more fragmented. But we can train our brains through techniques like grounding and mindfulness meditation in order to basically bring our chaotic minds back to focus. Grounding is the little brother to mindfulness. Mindfulness is very abstract, kind of making your brain control your brain. Grounding is its more concrete little brother, being able to focus on specific objects and make ourselves actively aware of what is happening in the here and now by using objects that we and experiences to focus on. As I said, a lot of my clients do put in a lot of practice at bringing their mind to the present by using grounding and mindfulness techniques.
I wonder if there might be some element of natural ability in that as well. I might make the comparison to a musician like Mozart, who didn't need to practice music to be an unbelievably excellent musician. It was
absolutely. Some people are just naturally gifted at things. Some people are naturally gifted athletes. And then there's the rest of us who have to work on it.
Right.
Good question. Good question.
Thank you, Monica.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Brenda Rossini. Brenda, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, dear. It was an excellent presentation. Your knowledge is just so stunning.
Thank you.
I wonder, you don't think that shock could have been why Holmes went to Tibet? The shock of falling down and fighting and all of that, rather than a search for mindfulness?
Well, for the purposes of this presentation, yes. But Actually another theory, and this is a presentation or a paper that I'll be writing probably in the next couple of weeks, is that Holmes, and this has been floated for years, but that Holmes suffered a dissociative fugue, which is a state of dissociation. You basically, like amnesia, where a person adopts another identity and then basically flees and creates a new life. That's a theory that's been floated for a really long time to explain the Great Hiatus. And with the DSM-5 changing some of the diagnostic criteria for what constitutes a dissociative fugue, I'm going to be writing that paper as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that I think could explain why Holmes was in Tibet. But for the purpose of mindfulness, I mean, it seems to make a lot of sense since, Holmes practices it in the pages. And, we'll just say that's the thing that really separates him from everyone else. So perhaps it was maybe both. Both are good.
Okay, and our last question, we're going to go to Madeline Quinones. Madeline, unmute and ask.
Okay, so this actually is not related to Sherlock Holmes, but to your talk, I'm curious, with helping your clients practice mindfulness, like, do parents struggle with mindfulness maybe more than other people?
Parents?
Yeah.
I mean, people who have children.
Yeah.
I think mindfulness is something that almost everybody, regardless of their parental status, struggles with. But I also recognize that in this extraordinarily chaotic world where parents are literally all over the place. I mean, my mother's official job, I think, was chauffeur when I was in high school, carting me from practice to sports practice to sports practice and other events. I mean, I think people who live chaotic and fragmented lives have difficult job focusing on being present in the here and now. And I think parenting and having children, just by the very nature of having to focus our, we'll just say, to having to focus our attention on our beings other than ourselves, absolutely lends itself to an increased state of fragmentation.
Right.
And so, yeah. So
because like I've got six other siblings, and I've been taking care of them ever since I was a young kid and watching after them. And I just remember like the different, like my sister, when she reads a book, you cannot break through her concentration. It's incredible. Me, I'm reading a book, I am absolutely in tune to everything that's going on around me, because once upon a time I really had to do that. So it's like trying to get myself to like, I can't even imagine spending just like 10 minutes trying to focus on my breathing. That sounds really hard.
Oh yes, and that's kind of the big challenge for a lot of people, is that because of the, for lack of a better term, chaotic or monkey mind that you have, and to be fair, mine too, because of just the way that either our brains were built, like mine with the ADHD, or environmentally like you with having to care for younger siblings and spread your attention to multiple things at once, you're basically adept at multitasking. And so that singular track mind is something that it's a foreign state to you, and therefore would probably be much more challenging for you than it would be for someone like your sister who hasn't had those life experiences. I mean, that makes sense. Part of my job is, in many ways, or we'll just say part of my job and my professional training puts me in a position where I have to multitask, but then I also have to shift my brain very, very quickly and single track. So I mean, it's a challenge even for this clinician. But that said, and I'll pull it up because I can. I mean, I use the call map, you know, on my phone, you know, basically just to kind of help my brain focus, because sometimes listening to a voice that is not inside my own head allows me to have a focal point to be able to focus on something else and to get my brain to kind of align where I want it to align. So good questions. And if anybody has any additional questions, you know, just feel free to throw them in the chat or pop over to the movie screening. I'm happy to talk psychology, to talk shop with people at any point in time. But anyway, thank you again for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Monica. That was delightful. We expect nothing less from a BSI class member of 2019, however, so representing. It's
Sexy
time for our
bitches.
story discussion, the adventure of the stockbroker clerk. We're very lucky the story discussion will be led by Mr. Bob Katz. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg. I heard from Greg shortly after he got off the phone